Shut up! Shut up and take the pain! Take the pain!
Hello there, and welcome once again. It was very warm today and sunny, our first day of spring in England. This week, in my quest to discover what went wrong for European civilization, I was thinking about Henry VIII. Here, he's hunting with Anne Boleyn, his second wife. In about 1500, he closed down every single religious institution in England and completely destroyed Christianity. There were about 800 priories. He closed them down, demolished them, burned them to the ground, took all their lands and money, and paid off any of the important priests. Such destruction is hard to explain, but it's even harder to explain when you understand that Henry VIII took Mass 3 times a day. And he did that even if he was out all day hunting, which he liked to do. He also wrote a long treatise against Martin Luther and Protestantism. So what was it then that caused him to shut down the monasteries? Was it that he, being a virile man who liked hunting, saw himself in the image of the gods as a microcosm and could not marry that any longer to how the Catholic Church behaved? St. Francis of Assisi was very famous for hugging lepers, and while it is a completely noble thing to do, something very big has been lost here. What I often notice when I'm in church is that the body of Christ is falling downwards, and the abstract cross, the abstract body, is rising up. Because that is what the job is, to overcome the planetary body and to develop the abstract body or the causal body that lives forever and that is perfect. It is a perfect unity of the positive and the negative. And that being is immortal. But the Catholics had begun to identify them with the suffering of the planetary body and had developed the habit of a wrong kind of emotional work known as moaning. This splitting into the wrong work of one side of the law of 3 is a very typical type of degeneration. In America, they developed the Prosperity Bible, where everyone is going to be rich and be saved. They have split and chosen the other side of the law of 3, you see. I can only imagine that this is the reason why King Henry did what he did. After I came back from India, having been trained in yoga and Buddhism, it dawned on me one day that all these churches that are littered over this country must have some kind of meaning, and I started looking for the yoga of Christianity. Eventually I found it, and it was really not very easy to do. Real Christians practice something called the hours, which is a sequence of prayers that happens maybe 7 times a day. And they work as hard as any yogi or Buddhist. But I tell you, this information was extremely difficult for me to find out. Now let's move on to Gurdjieff. He said something very interesting one day about ancient legends. I'll read it out. One day, I read in a certain magazine an article in which it was said that there had been found among the ruins of Babylon some tablets with inscriptions which scholars were certain were no less than 4,000 years old. This magazine also printed the inscriptions and the deciphered text. It was the legend of the hero Gilgamesh. When I realized that here was that same legend which I had so often heard as a child from my father, and particularly when I read in this text the 21st song of the legend, in almost the same form of exposition as in the songs and tales of my father, I experienced such an inner excitement that it was as if my whole future destiny depended on all this. And I was struck by the fact, at first inexplicable to me, that this legend had been handed down by Ashoks from generation to generation for thousands of years, and yet had reached our day almost unchanged. If you speak to students of Gurdjieff's teaching and you say to them, "Have you heard of the three centers?" they say, "Yes, I self-observe and self-remember." And if you say to them, "Have you heard of Gurdjieff's hydrogens?" they say, "Yes, I self-observe and self-remember." And if you say to them, "Have you heard of Gurdjieff's hierarchy of cosmoses?" they'll say, "Yes, I just made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich." The idea that anybody might take this seriously and construct practices to directly experience and explore these things is just completely absent. There's a state of total brain damage. And I must say I have been personally tortured by living on a planet where everybody is brain damaged in this way. I was in the shower a couple of days ago, remembering how much I loathed chemistry. I just could not understand whatever the fuck it was about. Physics was much easier because, it dealt with fundamental particles, but chemistry was something a bit slimy that kind of slid between the levels of physics and biology. Gurdjieff says, "The concept atom may therefore refer not only to elements, but also to all compound matters possessing definite functions in the universe or in the life of man. There can be an atom of water, an atom of air, that is, atmospheric air suitable for man's breathing, an atom of bread, an atom of meat, and so on. An atom of water will in this case be 1/10 of a cubic millimeter of water taken at a certain temperature by a special thermometer. This will be a tiny drop of water which under certain conditions can be seen with the naked eye. This atom is the smallest quantity of water that retains all the properties of water. On further division, some of these properties disappear. The reason why I hated chemistry so much is because nobody could really explain what it is, except Gurdjieff. And of course the chemistry that we have in the world is not exactly what Gurdjieff wanted, but it's moving, inching in the right direction. Between physics, chemistry and biology also you have a sequence, an octave if you like. But once again, the cosmological laws are hidden in plain sight, aren't they? I wanted to talk about 4-7-8 breathing, which is something that's being promoted in America, and I say this without wanting to criticize anybody. As soon as I saw 4-7-8 breathing, I recognized it was a case of American canaries. As I've said, I've been trained by the Shivananda School, Satyananda School, and by the Isha Foundation, which are three completely orthodox traditional yogic schools based in India, created by Indians and run by Indians. They are authoritative. And so I well know that the ratios of breathing practices used in India are 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. The books that are considered even in India to be the authoritative Bible for yoga are these books written by Saraswati, and in them you can see the ratios. The only time that a different number is used is only as an intermediary step. For instance, if you are trying to get to 142 and you can't quite make it, then you may use 132 temporarily for a couple of weeks before you get to the desired ratio. And this reminds me once again of the inception of America and the kinds of things that were seen in the American culture during its early days. One of those things was snake oil. As I've had many good experiences with Chinese medicine, I'm sure that the Chinese could do something very good with snake oil. But the meaning of it, of course, is that there are lots of zany and exciting, supposedly foreign things being sold in America, and people lapped it up over there. But I would say that you should let the Chinese be in charge of the oil of snakes, the Indians be in charge of their ancient system of yoga, and if you want to do something yourself, then make sure it comes straight out of American Protestantism, which has yielded fruit in various New Age things, which are pretty good. I wanted to say something about the bodies. I feel very clearly the chi body, I would call it, which I think is the Kesdran body. And I find my identity being fully inside of it, happening spontaneously these days. And sometimes there is the sense of a bright white light around it, which I believe is the mental body. And that mental body has a very high-pitched sound that frankly drives me crazy when it's around. And I believe that's because it is above the line of illumination. In other words, once the third body is formed, it forms a triad which allows a large amount of energy to flow through it, which makes it immortal or illuminated, basically. I'm probably doing about 4 hours of intense work every day, and I have been for the last 15 years, and these things grow very, very slowly by deliberate and authoritative practice. I've started to consider what it might mean to actually lose the planetary body and to remain wholly within the chi body. It's quite difficult to comprehend how you could have a life within it, but I suppose one could flower, you could develop a personality and an emotional aspect of the Kesdran body. I suppose that's possible, but from the perspective of a person on the earth, it would be very difficult to understand because it would be very fine and very faint, and the mental body even more so. It would be like the movement of light. And so of course it brings to mind the gulf between the ordinary people of the world and those people who have actually developed these things. I couldn't find it, but Gurdjieff had talked about how higher vibrations would simply destroy substances that couldn't cope with them. A human being, the fundamental energies inside of it, the moving center, the emotional and the mental, and you really are meant to live by using them, to work your body and your feelings and your mind together. It's not that you can't do interesting things in your mind, but the fact is, if you don't make your triad work, you are not creating real energy, and therefore you will perish. And that has a lot of implications because most of the things that are going on, especially in Britain being a service sector economy, are done with the head only, and therefore those people will meet a certain fate. And behind all that is a great deal of fucking cowardice, I tell you. Now Gurdjieff says, in reality, Kundalini is the power of imagination, the power of fantasy, which takes the place of a real function, when a man dreams instead of acting, when his dreams take the place of reality. When a man imagines himself to be an eagle, a lion, or a magician, it is the force of Kundalini acting in him. Kundalini can act in all centers, and with its help all the centers can be satisfied with the imaginary instead of the real. A sheep which considers itself a lion or a magician lives under the power of Kundalini. Which reminds me, I do hear people talking about the Kesdjan, the causal, and the amazing rainbow bodies that they have. The internet is full of that stuff. Have these people ever done a single hour of real work? Coming into our being are the three forces, and in order to become a real man, an octave man, those forces have to be very carefully knitted together. That means you must learn to work them together. Not that they are active at the same time, but that they are working together. You have to learn what that means. Gurdjieff says that the activity of the centers must correspond to each other. That does not mean that you are happy when you use the body. It does not mean that. The activity of the centers must correspond. They must be knitted together. They must be knitting together. Then Gurdjieff says that a great deal of material must be created before something new is formed. That means a great deal of knitting must be woven together before there is enough energy for the next story to form. In the upper story, the first new center to form is the high emotional that takes you to the religious experience. Civilizations rise and fall. Why? Why is that a break happens at some point and then there is development outside of the human body? The cars, the vacuum cleaners, the computers. There is development, society is creating things, but those creations are no longer part of the primordial energy inside the body. That's why Gurdjieff says if you want to study with him, send everybody home, start doing everything yourself. You have to get all the energy of your activity to be inside you, not outside. And you can see that the total desperation of the United Nations and all their fucking electric cars, all the frenetic activity that they are proposing, is creating more things outside of people whilst destroying traditional societies. This will only lead to extinction. As the life energy of people is orientated around creating things outside of themselves, so they die. A real culture, like the Japanese culture, is primordial roots that have travelled upwards through those people who loved the spirit of their own people, and they slowly wove that energy into all the different arts and crafts in the different traditions they have, the military tradition, the tradition of the cherry blossom and Mount Fuji, the art. All this is the working upwards of that primordial energy by people who loved the soil that they stood on until they reached heaven. That is a real nation. I tend to watch two channels. One is Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. That's a garage that works on classic cars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, which I love. And the other is Harry Metcalf's channel. And what I learned this week from Ian Tyrrell was that the fantastic Ferrari Daytona had a very interesting camshaft design. At high revolutions, the metal of the camshaft starts to distort and rotate inside the engine, What the Italian engineers had done, this was back in the 60s, they had milled the flanges at the far end of the camshaft, rotated by 4 degrees off the center line to compensate for the torsion that piece of metal experiences when it's revolving at high speed in the engine, so that it would be still lined up and that maximum power would be achieved at high RPM. These engineers in Italy in the 60s were able to merge together the beautifully refined and elegant lines of Italian cars with this tangible and physical knowledge, dealing with the complexity of materials and learning very subtle things that are hard to put down in words, things that can only be learned by the body. I'm even finding it hard to explain what it means, but there is some connection between the moving center of the engineers and the machines that they are working on. And this is an example of braiding together the 3 centers in your workplace. Now on the other side, Harry Metcalf was reviewing a new Aston Martin Vantage. And as he was being explained all the technical details by the Aston Martin sales rep, one sentence stuck out, which was this engine had several settings that was the key to differentiating the car. Now back in Italy, a Ferrari and a Lamborghini, the design begins with the beating heart of the engine. Now some engines are made with a V12, where you've got 12 cylinders in each cycle, which creates a very smooth flowing power. It's the beating heart. But this Aston Martin Vantage is not using an Aston Martin engine, it's using a German Mercedes AMG engine. And looking up that engine, it seems to be used in an awful lot of cars, about a dozen Mercedes, 5 Aston Martins, and there's even a Brabus that uses it. And what the sales rep was really saying was, we put a few settings on the engine so that you can make your car feel supposedly a bit different from all the other Mercedes, to conceal the fact that you're just buying it off the shelf and it's no longer an Aston Martin, and that Aston Martin is just becoming some kind of badge that you stick on the top. Just like all the chocolates in the supermarket are starting to taste the same because they are the same. The big brands like Kraft have bought them all up and now make them in the same factory from the same ingredients, bought from the same growers. This American corporate destruction has ruined so many living trees of unique material, unique chocolates, unique cars, unique everything, and represents a destruction of being part of Call Duty. Now there is one tree that is Kraft rather than 100, rather than a permaculture community. I saw the president of Argentina at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem looking for the chosen people. And I heard that the Mongolians, after Genghis Khan was killed, started to wail about the death of their leader. Winston Churchill was trying to regain the British Empire and led his people to total ruin. But people no longer feel their own hands when they work, and they adore the newspapers. As Western society has fragmented, it is the emotional people who really belong in the class of Shudras who've taken over this country. Now to end, something from the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna says, "Thou hast told me of a yoga of constant oneness, O Krishna, of a communion which is ever one. But Krishna, the mind is inconstant. In its restlessness I cannot find rest. The mind is restless, Krishna, impetuous, self-willed, hard to train. To master the mind seems as difficult as to master the mighty winds." The mind is indeed restless, Arjuna. It is indeed hard to train, but by constant practice and by freedom from passions the mind in truth can be trained. When the mind is not in harmony, this divine communion is hard to attain, but the man whose mind is in harmony attains it, if he knows and if he strives. Arjuna. And if a man strives and fails and reaches not the end of yoga, for his mind is not in yoga, and yet this man has faith, what is his end, O Krishna? Far from earth and far from heaven, wandering in the pathless winds, does he vanish like a cloud into air, not having found the path of God? Be a light in my darkness, Krishna, be thou unto my light. Who can solve this doubt but thee? Neither in this world nor in the world to come does ever this man pass away. For the man who does the good, my son, never treads the path of death. He dwells for innumerable years in the heaven of those who did good, and then this man who failed in yoga is born again in the house of the good and the great. He may even be born into a family of yogis, where the wisdom of yoga shines, but to be born in such a family is a rare event in this world, and he begins his new life with the wisdom of a former life, and he begins to strive again ever onwards towards perfection, because his former yearning and struggle irresistibly carries him onwards, and even he who merely yearns for yoga goes beyond the world of books. And thus the yogi, ever striving and with soul pure from sin, attains perfection through many lives and reaches the end supreme. Be thou a yogi, Arjuna, because the yogi goes beyond those who only follow the path of the austere, or of wisdom, or of work. And the greatest of all yogis is he who with all his soul has faith, and he who with all his soul loves. Okay then, well I think that's it for this week. You take care.
Looking out my window, yet all I see, don't know